Okay, in the interest of time, let's get kicked off here. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning. I'm Mike Smitherman, look after sales and marketing over here at Metric Insights, and also got Marius with me again today. Hi, Marius.
Hi, Mike. Hello, everyone.
So thanks for joining us. Some housekeeping items. Obviously, again, we're recording this, so we'll make the recording available up on our YouTube channel, Metric Insights. You can see a lot of good content up there as well. I encourage you to go take a look at that. Lines are muted as usual, so but we will take Q&A in the Q&A window, or feel free to chat in the chat window, and we'll take a look at those as we go through this, and leave some time at the end to answer any questions. But with that, we're going to be talking about AI for BI and the concept of agent harnesses and all that stuff. So, Marius, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So, if you are working on either AI or BI strategy within your organization, you've probably heard this question being asked from your management. You know, that AI is there's so much going on in AI right now. We're investing so much in AI across the board within the organization. Why are we still building dashboards? Why are we still investing so much in BI as well? So I don't know if you personally have heard this question, but I can assure you that if you haven't heard it, you will hear it soon. And it's not a mystery as to why. Right? If you think about it for a moment, uh, management is seeing success with AI in many areas, whether it's knowledge work, whether it's coding, and the BI feels like a natural place where every user should be able to ask questions and get answers to their hardest questions through an agent rather than having to bother an expensive analyst for everything that they need. But from the practitioner perspective, we have to answer a different question. We need to look at, the deeper question of why is it that if AI is in fact transforming coding and knowledge work right before our eyes, why is it that we can't get it to work for BI? And I say this because we talk to hundreds and hundreds of people, and it is very, very rare. In fact, I can't really think of anyone that we've spoken to in a large enterprise that says, we've deployed AI for BI across the organization, and it's been transformative, and we're really changing the way that people are using BI. We're moving away from the traditional BI dashboarding paradigm. The reality is that while there's the desire to do that with senior management, on the practitioner level, everyone has really been struggling with this. And in this webinar, really, we want to dive deep into why that is and what's the right solution. How do you solve for this in a way that actually does work? So to start, it's helpful to think about, what are the products in the enterprise that actually do work, that have broad scale adoption as they relate to AI. And there are three examples, three categories that I think fairly universally in organizations are successful. One is coding, where whether you're using OpenAI Codex or Claude Code or Composer 2.5, you're seeing significant changes in the way development gets done. More and more code is being written by the AI, with humans mostly guiding the process. It's also true in knowledge work. So if those of you that have maybe Claude Cowork or deployed in your organization have seen the power that that kind of technology has in helping people generate summaries from meetings and do an analysis on small amounts of information, generate basic sort of white papers and presentations, things of that nature. Huge force multiplier there. And then there's tools like Claude Design, where they transform the capabilities of someone without a lot of design skills, give them superpowers so that they can build compelling presentations, brand assets, UI designs for prototypes. It's helpful to think about these things and consider for a moment, what is it about these tools that works? What do they all have in common? Now, apart from obviously the fact that they're all being produced by frontier AI labs. Well, All of these technologies, they're all not just LLMs, they're not just agents, they're agent harnesses. Within the core of each of these tools, there is of course a highly capable LLM, but wrapped around it are all the right tools, the right context, the right workflow that makes that tool effective at generating very high quality work within the particular domain that it's targeted for. And this is exactly what we need in BI as well. So just like there's an agent harness for coding and knowledge work, there needs to be an agent harness for BI. Let's look at what that means. Consider for a moment externalities. What would trigger this agent harness? Well, there's users, of course, asking questions, but there are also external events. Data's been updated, and just like a good analyst, you want a human analyst, you want them to be proactive and take a look and identify anomalies and flag those anomalies to the appropriate user. So external events like critical data updates of KPIs would also be something that would trigger the harness. Then on the other end, there are all of the tools that the AI needs to be able to effectively serve the analytics use case. And here, the tools are very much the same as the tools that a human analyst would use. So if you think about how a human analyst in your organization answers questions, well, if you have a business glossary, someone new might consult it to figure out, how is this term that my business user is using defined. Uh, Everyone has learnings, both individually and within the organizational level. In other words, when you're given a task as an analyst, you don't start from scratch. You don't reinvent the wheel every time. You go, well, how did I solve some similar question in the past? What are the right patterns to solve for this? Maybe you'd ask your coworker about the best way to approach it. And then you go about solving it the same way, so that only a few smaller number of questions actually require a novel approach. Usually best practice approach makes sense. Certainly certified reports are useful to analysts, places where they know the data is good. And then any data sources underlying those reports would be used. So if I have Tableau or Power BI, and I don't happen to have a report that I can use as my BI analyst to answer the question, well, I could go and use that Tableau data source to build a new report or a semantic model to build something on top of that. And that would answer the question. And then, of course, the database. So if there's no reporting at all or no the reporting data sources that are available, but there is, in fact, a trusted database source, maybe I would use that. Ideally, I would have an agent that would work on top of that. So these are all the externalities. And in the center sits the BI agent harness. This harness does the routing. It takes a question and figures out, what do I do with it? It has prompting. Of course, it has the LLM as its core. It does planning. It knows how to use these tools that are on the right-hand side. And most importantly, it has the ability to generate the right context and a knowledge graph of everything that is available to it. Just like as a human analyst has a mental knowledge map of all the resources that are there and how to use those resources. And then that LLM works with those. It generates something, of course, with the right security guardrails, and then generates output that then it pushes out to the users as a response. We're not going to talk very much about the BI agent harness internals today, but I want to dive into why traditional approaches that people are using today for AI for BI don't work, and what's required in terms of the tooling that you give the agent harness to make it work. And that's where the rest of the focus of the presentation is going to be. So if you think about that, if you think about all the sources that you saw in the last slide, you would never dream of asking one of your BI analysts to go solve a question that's being posed by an executive without using all the resources at their disposal. Right? You wouldn't say, hey, Joe, go answer this question, but you can't look at the reports that are out there. Only go to the database. Or by all means, analyze it in the database, but you cannot consult a glossary to get any clarifications. That's absurd, right? No one would do that. And yet, This is exactly what we're doing when we're deploying a typical solution for AI for BI and enterprise. Let me explain. There are two primary approaches that most people use. And if you've tried to do something internally, I would bet you that you've used one of these. The first one is to deploy the BI tooling within the AI tooling, excuse me, within the BI tools that you already have, right? So if you've got Power BI, maybe you would you deploy Copilot. If you've got Tableau, maybe you put Pulse in, or maybe you try to look at deploying Tableau Next capabilities. But these approaches are flawed from the beginning because essentially they're missing the agent, they're missing the business context. Of course, also on the left-hand side, as I've noted, they're not proactive. They can only ever answer a user's question, but they're missing the context. They're not connecting to your glossary, whether it's Atlan or Calibra or Lation or wherever you hold your business glossary. That's completely outside the scope of the agent. They're siloed. So if you happen to have Power BI and Tableau, each of them only has its own semantic model and can only see what's in that model. And usually, even within that, if you let's say you have all Power BI, if you turn on Copilot and you're in a dashboard, it can answer questions from that dashboard, but it can't necessarily go and answer questions from other semantic models that you might have access to elsewhere. So there's this very narrow experience where users get a very unsatisfactory answer to their question because it's so limited by the scope that they have access to. And then finally, can't go to the data, right? The data agents, if you have Snowflake or Databricks or Fabric, and you've got data agents there, those are completely inaccessible if you've got to the BI tool agent harness. So that simply doesn't work. The other approach that is very common is people say, hey, I've got agents that I can turn on inside of my cloud databases, whether they be Snowflake, Databricks, or Fabric. And so let me go and turn those on. Well, again, there you don't have the reactive component. You only have the answers to the users. You don't have the proactive component, rather. So that's a challenge. But then furthermore, you're again missing information. If you've got glossary context outside of that particular database agent, if you haven't defined it for the database agent locally, it doesn't have access to it. So it's blind to all that context. There's no way for it to validate against trusted reporting, which of course any analyst with their salt would do. If you generate an answer and then there's a report out there that you can use to corroborate or sanity check the numbers, you would of course go look at that. But these agents are locked inside of your database, so they can't reach out and do that. And they are disconnected from all of the BI semantic model layer. And this is important because in most environments, semantics are not all in the database. You've built Tableau dashboards, you've got calculations and derived fields and all kinds of things in the Tableau data source. In Power BI, you likely have all kinds of things that Power BI semantic model associated with not just how tables should be joined, but derived formulas, calculations, things of that nature. And if the agent doesn't have access to that, then when it answers a question, it doesn't speak the same language as the business user, because the business user is looking at numbers in their dashboards today that are based on those calculations. So you've tied your agent's hands behind its back, hidden all this information from it, and then you expect somehow for it to generate useful answers for the user. Well, that's impossible, right? It's flawed from the beginning. So what's the answer? Well, I want to propose to you how we do this in Metric Insights from a functional layer. Like, what are the things that we do? And then Mike will show you actual examples of how it works in practice. So we believe foundationally, everything has to start with governance. So if you think about trust is built on the idea that the things that are answering the question, the sources for your answers, are themselves certified and trusted. That means certified reporting. It means certified agents. Not every agent might exist in your ecosystem. It means certified semantic models. And of course, it means access to glossary with certified terms associated with that. So that governance layer is the foundation. Without that, you just can't get started. And that means that BI governance is the foundation for effective AI. Can't be done without it. Once you have that foundation, then the next step is to build an effective agent harness that sits on top of that. In our product, we call that Concierge. And we'll show you how Concierge has access to all the sources in your enterprise in order to be able to answer questions informed by a complete knowledge graph of everything that's out there. And then finally, once you have that agent harness in place, on top of it, you have to build an experience that unifies AI and BI for your users. It's simply not good enough to say, here's a agent that you can go use someplace and have that experience be completely divorced from the dashboard experience that they have today. Whether you think that dashboards will continue to be relevant to your users for 3 months, for 6 months, for 6 years, forever, it doesn't matter because today they are using those. The semantic model for a business user today for BI is the dashboard because that is the tool they are using to access and trusted information. Since the semantic model for them is the dashboard, any kind of an AI experience for BI needs to be integrated with that dashboarding experience. It has to be KPI oriented and it has to provide users with grounding for any answers that it provides with the trusted dashboards that they know have been providing them reliable answers all along. So having that unified experience is very important. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike, who's going to show you how all of this looks in real life.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. So let's take a walk through some of the components of Metric Insights that Marius has just been touching on. Switch across to my demo environment here. So I'm going to talk through those 3 layers and obviously focus a lot on sort of the concierge and the combined UI that we just touched on. But the foundation, as Marius said, is this concept of having a governed space for your BI today, and that's through what I'm sure a lot of you on the call may have seen already, the concept of our BI portal, where we're effectively going out and plugging into all sources of BI in the organization, everything from your BI tools to spreadsheets and documents up on SharePoint, and allowing your teams to publish content in a governed and certified way. And we'll touch on that in a minute briefly. But what you're looking at here is our catalog view. Each of these particular tiles is a report from a source that we've published into the catalog. So you'll see I've got stuff coming from Tableau, Power BI, Click, Business Objects. I've got spreadsheets and documents in here. And when we publish content, if I take something like this Power BI tile here, we're doing a number of things. Obviously, we're making it available within the catalog, but we're also collecting a lot of metadata around this particular asset that we're publishing. So obviously things like names and descriptions, maybe ownership of the content you'll see on the right-hand side there. But importantly as well, things like what is sourcing this particular asset in terms of the underlying data and semantic models that are driving this particular report and dashboard. So in the case here, again, we've got this Power BI report being sourced from a customer support semantic model that is being driven by a set of tables and views in our underlying database. So all that is context to know what this report contains. Importantly as well, things like metric definitions and glossary terms, Marius touched on this in his slides, necessary to really not only give the user the knowledge of what it is in the report that they're looking at and how to determine what that really means, but also as we get into concierge in a minute, so that concierge knows what it is the question is about and how to effectively answer any questions about this particular metric or KPI. So the idea is that we can publish content, we can collect metadata around it, you can enrich content with metadata that maybe doesn't exist anymore, we can connect into your data catalog to bring in any relevant context that you might be setting there. And in the catalog and the portal itself, if I click into that, I have that context as a user as I'm looking at this particular dashboard and report, and in this case, it's in Power BI. So whether I'm looking at Power BI, Tableau, or spreadsheet, the experience is the same to me. And just very quickly, the way this gets into the catalog, if I come up here, is through the concept of process and workflows within the organization. So, typically we're not bringing everything in from your BI tools into this catalog. Again, it's a curated, governed experience that we want to make available to users. And as we'll see in a minute, Concierge, where as content gets created across the organization, we're basically doing the necessary checks and balances on that content before we certify it and put it into the portal. So we have the idea in Metric Insights of publishing workflows where, depending on the content, it may go through one or more steps of approval before it gets a level of certification and sign off and gets put into the catalog that we were just looking at. So again, users know that they can trust and understand that content. So the portal, the catalog, if you like, is the foundational piece of this to have that governed set of content, that trustworthy content that, again, both users, when they're looking at reports, can trust, but also, as we're going to look at now, our concierge, our AI for BI component can trust as well. So if we go back to that report that I was just looking at, you'll see now that I've slid out on the right-hand side our concierge. So this is an interactive chat component, similar to what you've seen probably in other tools. And it's hooked up to a number of things. So it's hooked up to our search, so I can go and look for reports and dashboards. I can ask questions about that metadata that we were just looking at, so how are certain things defined, for example. But it also lets me ask questions of data and ask questions of the underlying data that are feeding those reports and dashboards. And we do that today natively within Metric Insights for Power BI and Tableau. So I can ask questions directly within Concierge of the data in any Power BI or Tableau dashboard. And we also hook up to any other data agents that you may have set up. So Marius talked about the agents within the databases like Snowflake or Databricks or Fabric. Anywhere that you've got an agent that you have created and that you've certified and registered with the Metric Insights portal, that becomes a source, if you like, that we can answer questions from as well. We connect to those agents through an MCP server to pass questions off to. And effectively what Concierge is doing is when I ask a question, so maybe I'm looking at this dashboard, I see it's customer support, I see a ticket volume there, it seems a little high to me. Well, maybe I want to trend that ticket volume over the last 6 months. I can ask that question of the data. What Concierge is doing is it's basically inferring the intent behind the question. It's deciding which of those, who can answer this question effectively for me. In this case, it's the semantic model behind this particular report in Power BI. It's routing the question appropriately. And in this case, it's generating the DAX statement to go and answer this question directly from this report. And you'll see it's come back with a description for what I asked. It's given me context in terms of how it answered it and giving me that trend. And sure enough, I can see there seems to have been a spike in support volume over the last month. So, depending on the question I ask, it's going to route the question appropriately to the right source. Now, that's evident if I was to continue the conversation here. pre-generated some answers here. If I was to continue the conversation here and say, perhaps, well, I see the ticket count has increased in the last month in August, where our data is, and it seems to be, if you read this, it seems to be related to a lot of tickets around product returns that we have. I may want to go and ask a question about, okay, well, what was our actual product return rate in that month? And clearly that's not something that's available within the support data that is feeding this particular dashboard. And so, Concierge is smart enough to know to route this to another agent that can answer that question. And it might be another dashboard, or it might be one of these third-party, agents that we've registered with Concierge. And in fact, this time it's passing it off to a data agent that contains sales data within Fabric and bringing me back a response to my question. So, I'm not being constrained, like Mario said, to the particular report here that I'm asking questions of that might be, the case if I was in, say, Copilot or something like that. So similarly, we do this for Tableau. So, I can ask questions natively, without turning on AI in Tableau or Power BI, of, in this case, the data source behind our workbooks within Tableau. So why was return rate so high last month? Again, we're inferring the intent behind that question. In this case, we're generating BizQL against the underlying data source. And coming back with sort of the next level of detail, why was return rate so high? We're delving into the different filter values and the details within that data source within Tableau in this case to answer the question. So Concierge is a way of asking questions of the data and using it to intelligently route those questions to the right place to get it answered. But the modality of asking questions is just kind of one side of AI for BI, and it's kind of the main one that I think people think about as they're implementing this. In a lot of cases, users might not know what questions to ask, and we want to be more proactive around how we use AI to describe what's going on in the data. And we have two sort of angles to that within Metric Insights. One is I can use Concierge to provide a summary of what's happening, of significant changes within a dashboard, and that's effectively what's happening here. This is our dashboard. Rather than relying on a user to ask what's going on, it's proactively doing an analysis of the data in here and spotting significant trends that I may want to be made aware of, with again the details behind that I can drill into, and then obviously I could go on and do more analysis. So summaries of my dashboards, summaries of my data, proactively, doing that rather than, again, relying on users to answer questions. But also from more of an alerting capability as well. So maybe I want to set up alerts against a particular set of metrics that we have within our dashboard. I want to track those metrics over time. Metric Insights has an alerting engine behind the scenes where we can look for anomalies in metrics and highlight significant changes in the data that people should be aware of. Users can subscribe to those alerts. But beyond that, we can use Concierge to do more of a root cause analysis to uncover the why of why a particular alert triggered, to get to that next level of detail. And that's what you're seeing here is we have an alert set up that is looking for significant changes in the metrics we have in this dashboard. When they fire, we're using Concierge to do a deeper level of analysis of what's going on. So at the top here, you'll see across all the different filter values that we have within this particular dashboard, we're tracking metrics, any filter values that generate a significant change, we're highlighting those as alerts. If I click on those, I'm getting the next level of detail pre-generated of why that alert triggered, so that I can drill into that in more detail. Those summaries and alerts, obviously, I can send out via email or Slack, or get it through our mobile app, where again I can get those significant changes delivered to me with the root cause analysis, with potentially a pre-filtered view of the dashboard that backs up that answer. So I've got the context behind it, and again, it just drives me to a conclusion much quicker than having to look at a dashboard and answer questions in real time. So the final thing I want to touch on is taking Concierge and taking the portal and bringing it together into more of a cohesive experience for users. And we do this through the concept of what we call apps within Metric Insights. But think of them as UIs, persona-based user experiences that sit on top of the catalog that we were looking at before. So this view of all the content that a particular user might have access to. And bringing that into an experience that makes it much easier for them to consume what can be, potentially a lot of reports and dashboards out there. So an example might be the concept of, maybe I'm an exec, a manager within the organization responsible for certain regions and products, for example. And there's metrics cross-department probably that I'm interested in tracking each day. And these metrics might be coming from different reports and dashboards, different BI tools behind the scenes. But we want to provide a view to this particular user that summarizes and bubbles up the key performance indicators that I'm interested in looking at each day. And again, this one may be coming from Tableau, this may be from Power BI, this may be sourced from a data set somewhere. We want to bubble those up. We want to use the Metric Insights alerting capabilities to highlight significant changes in those metrics that might be interesting to me, hence the color coding that's going on here. We want to tie it into filters that are relevant to me if I'm responsible for a number of different regions or products, whatever it might be, so that I can filter through all those metrics in one go. And I get a snapshot of what's happening within my business, even though, again, today I might have had to go and look through, 16 different reports here to get to these details. We also want to tie in the concierge experience, and that can be from a couple of angles. So if I see ticket volume in the red, like we've got here, I don't necessarily have to figure out what question I should ask and how to frame it to get details on that. Concierge should ask the question for me. So taking into account the filters that I have set in here and the metric that I clicked on, it can formulate a question, taking into account the time period that I'm looking at here, take that question, route it to the correct report or agent to answer it without me having the overhead of trying to figure out where should I ask that question and how should I formulate that question to get the best answer. In this case, it's going to pass it off to a Fabric data agent to come back and answer it. We can also tie it into those proactive alerts. So if the change was significant enough that an alert has triggered, we want to do that pre-generated root cause analysis that we saw within the email that got sent out and flag that on the metric itself. So in this case, rather than asking the question in real time within Concierge, ticket volume moved so much, almost 50% up last month, that it triggered an alert. That alert pre-generated a root cause analysis of what's going on. And again, rather than asking the question here, I can click on that alert. It's immediate because we've already generated it. I can see the ticket volume seems to be due to a high number of product returns within the period that we're looking at. So using these custom experiences, branded and set up in a way for each persona within your organization, taking this KPI first approach that summarizes a particular user's world as it relates to BI and data, and bringing in the AI components to it makes it much easier for a user to navigate this sort of combined experience that we're expecting them to work with today, where I have many reports I can look at. I'm potentially getting more and more agents that I can ask questions of. We need that to come together into a cohesive experience. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an idea around why potentially you're struggling when you're turning on agents in your BI tools and databases, and really why it requires kind of this next level of thought and scaffolding around those things to really make it useful to your end users. And so, with that, we're going to open it up for some questions here. I see there's some questions coming in. And we're also going to do a couple of giveaways here. I think we have a couple of Amazon gift cards that we're going to give to say thanks for people joining. Couple of housekeeping ones. Is it possible to get the recording? Yeah, we are recording this. So again, it will be available on our YouTube channel. So feel free to go out to Metric Insights, subscribe there as well. We have lots of good content that goes up there, and it will probably be available by the morning. So Marius, a couple of questions coming in here. Can you talk about how data security is handled in Concierge?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, especially since, obviously row-level security for users is a big factor and a consideration for any kind of deployment of any kind. The way this works is that when we connect to the Power BI or Tableau semantic models, we are connecting as the user. So there's OAuth for Power BI, for Tableau, it's the JWT token type approach. And there, so any questions that are asked of those semantics are always done as the user, and row-level security would be maintained in the same way that it would if they were using a dashboard built on that model. In the case of any agents that you've connected to, there's two levels of security. First of all, a particular agent may or may not be available. As you remember seeing a list of agents that Mike showed earlier, it may be that one user group has access to certain agents and other group has access to different agents. Furthermore, once you ask a question of an agent, that is again done through your identity with OAuth. And so in that situation, we make sure that through OAuth, we know that all row-level security is preserved. So everywhere within the interaction, row-level security is preserved for the user.
Okay, a couple more here. I use this for a dashboard. Let's assume I'm using this for a Power BI dashboard. Then is the agent taking data from the dashboard semantic model, or is it fetching it from the database?
And how is it dealing with data transformation or unit conversion specifically in time series? So the agent, the whole point is that the agent is when you're talking through a Power BI semantic model, we are fully leveraging the semantic model. And what we're doing is that we are mining that semantic model through, we have already have plugins through the native, we use the API. We bring in all of the learnings, if you like, from the semantic model, the formulas, the definitions, the structure of the model. We then generate DAX based on that information. So it is fully leveraging that layer. It's not going directly to the tables. It's going through the semantic model for the tables. And that's of course important, because if we were not doing that, then there'd be no way to assure that in fact the answer is going to be consistent with the kind of information you're seeing in the dashboard.
Okay, I guess somewhat related. How do you deal with hallucinations from the LLM?
Yeah, so that's also a really important question. As we all know, no matter how capable LLMs are these days, they do tend to still hallucinate to some amount. There are a number of ways in which we address that. I think from a first principles perspective, because we are leveraging the semantic model and because we have a high quality of context that's provided, that is very helpful. Generally speaking, if you put LLM against a database and all it knows is about the joins and the tables and a little bit about the columns, there's so many different ways to get the same answer that you're just going to get variability and inconsistent results there, right? So having the benefit of all of the semantics and processing those up front is really key to getting a more successful result on the first shot. And then the second thing is that the once we have a path that's been successful, we've answered a question, we know that that's a good query because we're able to generate a good result. We either get a thumbs up or there's no feedback indicating that there's a problem. Then that goes into memory, and we don't reinvent the wheel. So remember at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned an analyst doesn't redo things every time from scratch. You, as an analyst, you think, well, okay, I know this is the right way to answer this question. So if I get a similar question, I'm going to go and use the same approach. We do the same thing here, so that those trusted golden paths for how to answer questions become the way that we go to de facto rather than asking the agent to invent things. So those together work really well to ensure high quality.
I think we have one or two more questions, but while Marius was answering that, I just ran a picker from our list here to pick a couple of people for our gift cards. We'll reach out via email, but I've got Tan Tran here. So congrats, Tan, and Anastasia. I'm not going to try and pronounce your last name, but you'll get an email from us too. So thanks for joining. And we have one more question here, Marius. How do you ensure consistency across sources, I guess, in terms of the questions, right, in terms of metrics and stuff?
Yeah. So in large ecosystems, this is certainly an issue that every organization deals with. You've got different semantic models within different databases. Maybe are they coherent across them? Is the same number going to be the same across different dashboards? Across your entire Power BI or Tableau ecosystem, probably not. But even across your trusted dashboards, we all, have that almost cliche example of people showing up at meetings and coming up with different numbers. So how do we deal with that? Well, we profile the data when it comes in and the semantics when it come in, and then we also look at the measures and we identify areas where those measures are inconsistent, whether they be measures coming from a database or different report semantic models, and then we flag those for review. So you remember Mike showed you that workflow where you go through and publish content. The idea is that you really can't get through that if your semantic model is inconsistent with the known corpus of semantics that we have today, right? If you have sales numbers that do not line up in this dashboard with the sales numbers that we have in another dashboard, we require that in the publishing process, you either disambiguate that, in other words, you say, oh, well, the reason these numbers are not the same is that these are retail sales and here's online sales. That goes into the learnings, and then the model knows which way to deal with that. Or you maybe resolve it with actually dealing with the underlying problem itself, right, in the database and in the tool. So there's tooling to make sure that the overall sort of this composite semantic model that forms when you pull all these different semantic models together, that it is in fact coherent and accurate and it's disambiguated.
So we're at our 45 minutes here. Thank you everyone for joining. Again, the recording will be up on YouTube tomorrow morning, so feel free to share that. And if you have any further questions, you can reach us at info.metricinsights.com. Look forward to talking to you at our next webinar. Thank you, Marius.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks all for joining.